Today we're talking about something that's really close to my heart, and that's basically the weight of the inner wounds that we carry. Often those are wounds that come from childhood, that come from the way we grew up, the people that were around us as we were finding our own identities and figuring out how to be a person in this chaotic world. So often in those developmental years, certain damage gets done. And it doesn't have to be these big traumatic events to cause damage. And those wounds can show up in the most interesting ways as adults, and they can actually cause other people to have the same wounds if we don't find our own self-awareness of those wounds and figure out how to heal them. So today, imagine that we're having a coffee or a water, and this is just a nice deep conversation about life and about humanity and what it means to be human and figure ourselves out. I want to start by posing a question to you. Have you ever had this experience where you went to someone and you shared something kind of vulnerable or sensitive, or just maybe a heavy emotion where you told them, I've been feeling really down, or I've been feeling really stressed, I've been so overwhelmed with life, and their response was kind of disappointing, or it made it even worse? For example, maybe you told them, hey, I've been so stressed, and instead of listening or actually even just acknowledging what you said, they brushed it off with something like, yo, we all feel that way sometimes. Or even worse, they say something like, oh my word, you have no idea how stressed I've been. And then they launch into their own story, almost as if to tell you how much harder they have it than you. And you're left feeling like, why did I just share this with you if I feel like suddenly this conversation is about you now, even though I tried to tell you something vulnerable from my side? It can also happen when you present a need to someone. By the way, being able to ask for what you need in a calm, mature way, that's a healthy thing. People can't read our minds, so it's our responsibility to express our needs. So if you're the person expressing your needs and it's not received well, it's not your fault. Please hear that. So let's say, for example, you ask, hey, can we try spending some more time together? I feel you've been a little bit disconnected lately. And instead of them actually hearing you out and responding to what you actually asked for, they respond with something like, well, I feel that you've been really disconnected this last while. And I know I'm adding a lot of attitude to this conversation, but those things happen. Like you express this need and they go, well, I also have this need, or I feel the same way. And suddenly you're feeling like, well, okay, we're in a stalemate now and neither of us win, and the conversation just stops there. So because there's nowhere to go from there, how do you then solve that? This can be such a mind... I want to say an ugly word now. This can be such a mind blech, because in those moments you feel really powerless. You feel like, did you even hear me? Did you even understand? Did you even try to understand what I've been trying to say? And why did I even bother sharing this? At the end of the day, where you were kind of going to this person to unpack something or to just blow off some steam or whatever, and suddenly the conversation flips and you're left carrying their weight, this can just cause us to stop sharing our feelings altogether, or just stop sharing our needs because we feel it never worked out. The more these kinds of things happen, especially when you're a child, especially in your developmental years, this behavior can deeply affect someone. And the craziest thing of all of this, even while we now know how much this behavior hurts us if someone does it to us, we might not realize that we're doing it too. Which is something that I've had to come to admit to myself and my partner as well. And that's not fun to admit, but it's the reality of how these things work. These issues trickle down from generation to generation, and it just never stops until one person is willing to go, whoa, I acknowledge this, I see this, I don't want to be this person, so let's try and move forward. What can I do to heal this wound in me? So firstly, let's ask, where does this behavior come from? Why do people do this? And why is it so hard for some people to hold space for others? Why do they always seem to turn the conversation back to themselves instead of pausing to have empathy for us? And it often starts with how people grew up, or how they were treated by the people closest to them. Maybe, for example, their emotions were constantly dismissed. When they cried or they expressed frustration as a child or anger, they hear these things like, you're overreacting, or it's not that big of a deal, or why are you making such a big deal of this? That can really hurt, and that can make you question your own sanity and your own reality. Invalidating emotions isn't always about what someone said to you, and sometimes it's kind of about what wasn't said, because if you share your emotions and someone doesn't even pause pause to go, wow, I hear you, that sucks. Even that can leave a deep wound, and that can cause us to become adults who have this deep wound and this deep need for our emotions to be acknowledged. So what do? We just basically pay it forward with our issues. When someone else brings up their need, we make it about ourselves. Like, ugh, I hate it when I do that. Like, I've become so self-aware of the moments where I turn the conversations back to myself and I start making it about myself. And then suddenly we're in a situation where I'm trying to make myself feel heard by you, even though you were the one coming to me to tell me how you were feeling. Like, what? When someone shares their need, if you're the person doing the hurting by making it about yourself, you're basically subconsciously being reminded of all the times that you weren't validated, of all the times that you weren't heard. And when someone brings up a need, that silent little child voice in you goes, I also have that need. I also want to be heard and I also need to be heard. And it's kind of a threat to your own validation when someone else wants to be validated, or it's a threat to your own needs that need to be met when someone else presents their need. I feel we're getting somewhere. And the thing is, it's not necessarily a malicious act. When we redirect this conversation back to ourselves, it's almost like an involuntary reaction where we just do it and it just happens. And it just happens kind of before we even realize what we're doing. And suddenly we're invalidating the person sitting in front of us and we're doing the exact thing that we don't want people to do to us. And that's where the mind, I want to find a nice word to say this thing that I actually want to say. And that's where the mind-blowing thing comes in, when we realize that, for example, if your parents were the ones to invalidate you as a child, where they didn't acknowledge your emotions or they turned things around and made it about them, hint, they probably felt the same way for a very long time before you were even in the picture. And maybe their emotions weren't validated as a child either. Their needs weren't heard, weren't met, and they carried that pain into how they treated you. And suddenly you're a child and your parent is subconsciously expecting you to validate their emotions, which is, number one, unfair towards you as a child. That's not okay. But it helps us start to understand how these generational cycles perpetuate and continue if we don't stop to pause and treat them and be intentional to heal them. And it also sometimes gives us a little bit compassion for our parents to understand, okay, whoa, they weren't malicious, they aren't malicious. And this is maybe not even something that they realize or that they can help to do. So ultimately, it's not about blaming, it's about understanding where all of this began. And the craziest thing is when this happens over and over in different relationships, so with friendships, with partners, with parent relationships, with family members, people stop opening up to each other. If you feel constantly invalidated by a certain friend, you probably will stop sharing things with them. You'll start feeling disconnected. And if you do this to your child, for example, unknowingly, your child might start internalizing that their feelings don't matter and your feelings matter more than theirs, and they should be more attuned to your needs rather than their own. And that's the ripple effect. This is where empathy becomes so important. Firstly, empathy for yourself, because you know you deserve better. And if you don't know, you deserve better. And then also empathy for the people you care about who might feel dismissed when you unintentionally shift the focus to yourself or don't acknowledge their emotions. That part of you that is constantly longing to feel heard and feel seen and feel validated, it's real and it's valid. And it deserves healing so that you can live a lighter, easier, simpler life where you don't constantly have to carry this weight of feeling like you don't matter. And that's where we get to the hard truth. While this wound might not be your fault, the healing of the wound is your responsibility. We have to take responsibility for our own healing. And we don't always have a say in the matter when it comes to the things that happen to us, that where we had no choice or where we had no control. We might be sitting with trauma or complex trauma or whatever other internal wounds because of this, but it's our responsibility to then heal them, not only towards ourselves, so that we become healthier people who can just live lighter lives and not have all the drama and the trauma and the that thing of dealing with all of this constantly and just reliving this feeling. It's our responsibility to go, I want to heal for the sake of myself, firstly, because I deserve it. And I want to heal for the sake of those around me because I want to have healthy relationships. I want to show the people around me that I care about them and that their emotions are also valid. If we don't take those steps to heal ourselves, we risk passing that same pain onto the people we love the most. So healing in this context means a few things. And firstly, it means learning to recognize when your wounds are speaking for you. And then it means reflecting on where those patterns come from and giving yourself the validation that you didn't get as a child. It's also a part of doing some inner work to go, whether someone recognizes my emotions or not, they're valid. Whether someone is willing to meet my needs or not, my needs are valid. And this means practicing something new. So the next time that someone shares their feelings with you, even if you go into that reaction by accident the first time and you're like, ooh, whoa, that just happened. Pause, go, can I quickly rewind and redo this? And instead of responding with your own story, try holding space for them. And even if you did make it about yourself, turn the story back to them and ask them a question. Go one step further and ask them to share more, to expand on what they just shared so that you can actually hold that space for them. Because that's what you would want someone to do for you. So let's do a little example. Say someone shares quite deep emotions with you, or they're telling you they're really overwhelmed or stressed or something like that, but you're also feeling this secretly. Okay. Not secretly, but you haven't told that to them yet. So maybe you go, thank you so much for sharing that with me. I'm so sorry to hear you're feeling that way. That sounds really hard. How have you been managing all these emotions? Or you can say, how can I support you through this? And after you've held that space for them, yes, there's still time for you to also bring up your emotions. The one thing we need to know is that people who have these wounds that are not healed yet, and maybe they don't even have awareness of these wounds, they are not the people we should be seeking validation from. They are not the people we should be sharing these deep emotions with in order to feel heard, if that makes sense. We can share it with them so they know, but we might need to expect that it'll be turned around onto them anyway. However, find those people who are willing to hold space for you. And maybe it'll take some figuring out where you'll share some things with a few people close to you and you'll start noticing, cool, these people hear me and they can hold space for me. These people don't hear me. They're not able or they don't want to hold space for me. And that's okay. Then we don't have to share our emotions with them. We don't owe anyone an explanation or update on our emotions all the time. And when you do this, you create space for others to feel seen. You might see a new side of those around you too, and in doing so you start rewriting your own story and you become the person you've always needed. Like, how beautiful is that? When you do this work, you're breaking that cycle that's been carried for generations. You're creating a legacy of love, validation, and presence. Wouldn't you want that to be your legacy? A lot of those generational cycles that I've noticed in my own family, I know I don't want to leave the same legacy, not out of a place of feeling bitter or angry or anything, but just out of a place of, I've had quite a hard time figuring out these things and working through these things, and it hasn't been easy and it hasn't been fun most of the time. And I don't want to create that same feeling for others. I want people around me to also feel lighter. One day when I have kids, I also want them to not have to deal with this shit as they get old. I said shit. Oops. To not deal with this stuff as they get older and just be able to live lives and focus on the things that light their souls on fire, that make them excited. Whether you have a child or not, imagine your child years from now, you see them holding space for a friend in need, where they go, hey, I'm so sorry you're feeling that way. I'm talking in a little cute kid voice. I'm so sorry you're feeling that way. Why do you think you feel that? Like, imagine you see that happening and you're so proud because they grew up knowing that their emotions are valid, and another person's emotions wanting to be validated is not a threat to their own emotions being valid or not, because they grew up feeling seen and worthy and they know it to their core. So what do you think? Does this resonate with you? And I'd love to hear if you could relate to any parts of the story, either in being in the seat of the person experiencing this or being in the seat of the person doing this, or both maybe. If you're on this healing journey, just know you're not alone. Some of these things might seem simple or stupid, or like other people just do things, and how are you struggling with something so basic? You're not alone. It's not that simple. Life is freaking complicated and we're all just trying our best. You're already doing something incredibly brave by just even thinking about this and letting yourself dive into your own mind and brain and consciousness. This is the Stefanie Lowe Show. If you like content like this, where we kind of ponder life and just talk about how our brain works, how humanity works, how behavior works, like, I'd love to have you here. So do all the things you know. Your journey begins with this awareness, and you are seen and you are heard and you are enough, whether people validate your emotions or your needs or not. They are valid. They are valid. This is the Stefanie Lowe Show. Bye.